Okay, so welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Catherine Herdlick. Catherine has a Master's of Fine Arts and with a concentration in multimedia and game design. She has over 10 years experience in the game industry in general. I work on video games, in hardware startups and also in e-commerce. And there she has worked as a game producer, designer and also manager in a number of companies, including Electronic Arts and also Zynga. Currently, she holds multiple roles. Among them, she's an adjunct professor for interaction design at the California College of Arts. And she's also, for example, lead producer in a company called First Person Travel. And her professional and presumably also her personal life is really dedicated to making playful things that promote creativity, collaboration, and also compassion in our rapidly changing world. And today she will talk to us about the Come Out and Play Festival San Francisco that happens every fall and that she basically initiated and organizes. So welcome, Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine. As you heard, I've worn a lot of hats. I identify as an artist, an entrepreneur, a game designer, an educator, and a curator. So I'm mostly going to be talking today about my curatorial practice as the leader of Come Out and Play. I'm also going to talk about two more recent games that I've worked on, so you'll hear me speaking from the perspective as an artist and a designer as well. One of the best ways to compress all of those things that I do, usually for simplicity, I'll say, I'm a game designer and an entrepreneur. That's what I'll say because people can understand that really quickly. But what I really will often say when I want to get deeper is that I'm a playmaker. Because whether I'm leading a team of people or creating a festival or developing a product, I believe that I like to inject play into that process so that the end result is something more deeply meaningful. So a little bit of my background. Right after undergraduate school, I went to work at the Boston Children's Museum, and that's where I caught my learning by playing kind of bug. I got really into the idea that you could learn through hands-on activities. At that time, I was wanting to go into exhibition design, so that's why I went to Parsons to get my MFA. At Parsons, I focused a lot on learning about play and children, psychology of play. I created a computer vision playground that was originally games, but then it was sort of evolved into a play space. So the idea was that the kids could create their own games for this space. I also learned from one of the very first textbooks on game design called Rules of Play. I actually learned from the manuscript. I studied under Katie Salen, who has gone on to form entire schools based on game design principles. And then shortly thereafter, I ended up working at GameLab, who was the other author of that book, which was Eric Zimmerman. He was the CEO of GameLab. And I spent 5 years there really cutting my teeth on game design specifically. So I never made it back into the exhibition design world as I had hoped, but that's what happens sometimes in career. It takes you in different paths. So at GameLab, we're most famous for creating the original Diner Dash. Has anyone played Diner Dash here? Yeah. So we created the original one. It was published by Play First, so they're more affiliated with the brand than GameLab publicly. And the reason, we also did a lot of social change games. So we worked on a game about poverty as an obstacle to education in Haiti. That was called The Cost of Life. And one of the things that was so wonderful about GameLab was the culture there, actually. The culture was really focused on collaboration and on having a creative practice outside of work, which I didn't realize at the time, but now I realize is very rare in an employer that they want you to have a creative practice outside of work. And so this ended up resulting in a collaboration between a bunch of game labbers that resulted in Come Out and Play. So these are the 5 founders of the festival. From left to right, that's Nick Fortuno, Mattia Romeo, that's me, Catherine Herdlick, Peter Lee, who's the other co-founder of GameLab, and Greg Trefry. And Greg continues to be, on the far right, continues to be the executive director in New York. So the 5 of us started the Come Out and Play Festival. And the reason that we knew that we all wanted to do this was we were getting together and sharing through brown bag lunches that GameLab would have, and we were sharing the individual work that we were doing. I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail later. After a number of years at GameLab, about 5 years, I moved out here and did a number of jobs, still focusing on more casual games. So I worked on some Facebook games at EA. This is Dragon Age Legends. And then still small casual games. They have a quicker development cycle, so you're able to like learn really quickly. So I worked at Siftio, which are these like little movable blocks. It's since been acquired by 3D Robotics and no longer in production, but it was really fun to make this sort of real world game, but also digital hybrid. And then most recently, in terms of video game work, I worked at a few other companies, but nothing that you would have heard of. Most recently, I worked at Zynga, and I worked on Looney Tunes Dash, which was a mobile game. And that was a real pleasure to work on because it was a game that was played by millions and millions of people. And so in terms of scale, it was just really a treat to work on that. I run my own company, and this is, again, in terms of thinking of what I've learned over my career is that I really value bringing an opportunity for people to be creative and collaborative and compassionate. And this is an example of, it's just a business, it's a product, but it is allowing people to be really creative. They're actually designing their own artwork. So it's custom wood inlay maps that are designed using my online design tool that's pulling in data from Google and OpenStreetMaps. And it's fun. I mean, it's playful, just kind of like Photoshop would be if you didn't have to design something for a client or something like that. You're designing it based on a place that's really special to you. So people will do wedding locations or where they grew up or favorite vacation spots, places like that. I also run workshops so people can come in and actually make the maps that they design, and that's continuing the collaborative process. I always say that when it comes to Woodcut Maps, Woodcut Maps is, and my staff, we're the artisans, we're the craftspeople, but we are not the artists. The artists are our customers. They're the ones that are actually designing the maps. So the other thing I do currently is I work at First Person Travel. We do this immersive narrative travel agency and trip, which I'm going to talk about briefly at the end of my presentation. And I teach at CCA. I teach a class that's actually called Play, and it's in the interaction design program. So it's part of their required progression through the program, and they're applying it to interaction design. So these are students that are going on to become user experience designers, user researchers, product designers, probably product managers later in their career. And they're learning how to use play for both to provide a sense of delight within the experiences, but also as a way to promote behavioral change. CCA has a strong social mission, so a lot of the students are trying to understand how they can use compulsion loops in ways that don't necessarily get you to just spend more money, but perhaps to get you better at saving money. So we spend a lot of time in the class thinking about how play can create fun approaches to hard goals that you create for yourself. Okay, and now come out and play. So this is a festival. It's an annual festival of street games, and actually I would even go beyond that. It's more. It's like real world games. Has anyone here ever been to Come Out and Play? Okay, go on. Awesome. Did you have a good time? Good. That's our number one goal. Has anyone heard of Come Out and Play before today? Okay, a few people. That's good. That's good. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. It started back in 2006 with, remember the people, the five of us, the 5 game labbers. And just to give you context, so we started talking about it in 2005, and the first festival was 2006. It was over 10 years ago, and I'd just like to remind people what the world of play was like, because there's a lot of stuff today that's really playful that didn't exist then. So for instance, the iPhone didn't exist until 2007. The App Store, Google Play, the mainstream adoption of GPS and based consumer services like Yelp or Foursquare, Facebook, Twitter, the Great Recession, gamification, chat roulette, first black president of the United States, Kickstarter, crowdfunding. Just crowdfunding didn't exist. The hashtag didn't exist. Fitbit, flip video cameras, which were weird for a small period of time, selfies, Instagram, YOLO, streaming audio and video, ebooks, Kindle, Siri, and Alexa, Snapchat, emoji. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's all of these really playful things that just did not exist. And that's the context in which we started this. We were thinking about, just like how all of these things do, what we could do to connect with each other, but also the world. So we didn't want to just be connecting people. We wanted to be connecting people to each other so they could have a sense of space. So just a reminder, these are the people who started it. I told you about the brown bag lunches we have. So in 2006, our vision was really kind of like to hack the city. We wanted to turn the city into a big playground. We wanted to use it in creative ways. And this came from looking at the things that we were doing in our individual work. So Greg, for instance, was developing a game. He'd been working on a game called Payphone Warriors, which used payphones. It was like capture the flag, but the payphones were the flags. So you would capture the flag by receiving a phone call from a payphone. So he did this using a computer system that was making automated phone calls and measuring the length of time that you were on the phone. I was designing, I had like evolved from my computer vision piece into a much more lo-fi project, which was these crazy fun houses and forts that kids were building collaboratively together. It was really just as fun and a whole lot easier for me to build, but the same affordances were produced in terms of the kids having imaginative play. Nick had done this big urban game in Minneapolis, St. Paul with like a huge pond, and people would text in where they wanted it to move, so they were racing across the city, and they were literally being routed by a group of people. Mattia had been working with a group from NYU on Pac-Manhattan, which is exactly what it sounds and looks like. It's live action Pac-Man in New York City. And they're using phones. I mean, those are like flip phones they're using to collaborate with each other about spotting ghosts. And so we ended up crafting a mission statement. And this is what we are all about. And we wanted to craft a mission statement that could survive the test of time. We had no idea the direction that technology and play were going. We had ideas, but we could never be certain. So we decided that we wanted to provide a forum for new types of public games and play, that we want to bring together a public eager to rediscover the world around them through play with designers interested in producing innovative new games and experiences. So it was a lot about connecting players and designers. And one of the conceits was that, well, I have people that like to come to my play forts, or I'd also done overnight scavenger hunts, like in the style of Midnight Madness, the movie. I had all these people coming to play my games. We had people coming to play Pac-Manhattan. We had people coming to play Payphone Warriors. They probably would like the other person's projects, but people they were so ephemeral that people weren't finding out about it. So we thought, well, we can have a density. We can put them all in one place, and that way players can find new designers. And so that was the conceit, and it's worked out very well. And then we want to have city-sized fun. So we want to make sure it's fun. You could do the above, and it could be pretty esoteric, but not necessarily fun. For us, it was very important that it be fun. And so we did it for a number of years in New York. It's still running to this day. In 2009, I moved out here to San Francisco and started the first festival here in 2010. We did we've been in a bunch of venues since then. A lot of our designers in the early years actually were from San Francisco, so they were flying all the way to New York and running their games in New York. Since then, I mean, we've seen so many changes happen. Since then, New York has its own community. A lot of the games are developed by NYU students because Greg and Mattia teach at NYU and Nick teaches at Parsons, so a lot of those games are actually designed by students there. And so San Francisco has its own community, and we've seen over the years there's actually a few differences in the types of games that are run here and there. There's a lot of crossover as well. There are some people that do like a festival circuit, which is part of the growth. We were the first street games festival. After we started in 2006 in New York, Hide and Seek started in London, and IGFest started in Bristol, United Kingdom. There's also festivals in Greece and Berlin and Poland. So there's literally festivals have sprouted up all over the world. A number of them have shut down because there is actually kind of a lot of work involved in running these events. But there's been these sort of localization happening, whereas before everyone had to come to New York. I mean, we had people coming from abroad for the first one, and it was the only place that they could show that kind of experience. San Francisco is obviously a great spot for it. People love to play in San Francisco, so we have the full spectrum of things. My favorite memory I'm going to share with you, because it's from the 2010, the first year in San Francisco, and I often get asked what my favorite memory of the whole festival is, from 10 years of designing these games and seeing these games run. Strawberry Hill is a game. It was a real world. It was a how did they describe it? A real-life survival horror game. So it was sort of based off of some mechanics that you'd see in a survival horror video game, but it was real life. And it was played on Strawberry Hill in Golden Gate Park at night. And there were you were avoiding zombies, and you were trying to find these treasures, and just basically you were just trying to survive and not get tagged. And you could work with people, but if they got tagged, they would become these zombie. They weren't like active chasing you zombies, but they were very scary. While we were playing this game, and I actually met some friends that are today remain my dearest friends, and that's one of the powers of this, like bringing people together in the real world to play. So you have these heightened emotional experiences where you're collaborating on a shared goal or competing on a shared goal, and it ends up creating just a different type of relationship, very, very unique. And so we had developed, for instance, a call to communicate with each other in the dark without bringing attention to ourselves, which was yip, 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 like a coyote. So we still say that when we see each other, we'll do yip, yip, yip. But the favorite memory is actually, so it ended up being on the same night as one of the playoff games in the World Series with the Giants. And we were in a place where I was hiding in a bush or something, and I was separated from my partners. And all of a sudden I heard like the whole city, like honking of the horns. I mean, it was an eruption of noise, which at the time I was like, it's really happening. There's actual zombies. I mean, that's how it felt for a split second. And then I was like, oh, that's right, the baseball game. People are joyful. But the fact that it can just give you a little nugget of, hey, here's a different idea of what can be going on in your world, can change how you perceive things that aren't even intended to be part of the game. And it was so powerful, and it was so cool to be able to have a World Series memory that had nothing to do with watching it at a bar. In 2012, in San Francisco, we moved the festival into a gallery at Soma Arts. So we applied for a curatorial residency. And this was an opportunity for me to really up my game as a curator and focus on what does it mean to have games in the street, and what does it mean to have games inside a gallery. And what kinds of games am I trying to do? And so in this, I ended up writing a curatorial statement, and it was all about that aspect of bringing people together through play. We've continued to see a lot of polarization in San Francisco, and so making the games be sort of accessible to everyone, not too niche, is really important, and also making them be just really playful. So for instance, just having out a bunch of rolls of tape results and showing people that it's okay to do it. People were just taping up the gallery and inventing their own games. I mean, they were literally turning the gallery into their playground. We still had the street games. We had a lot of rain that year, so a number of our outdoor games ended up being played inside a recreation center. It was also a longer event. We had 2 weeks of programming, as well as about a month inside the gallery. Another cool thing that we had in the gallery that really put the idea of play and like what it means to be in a gallery on its head was we had an art heist opportunity. So in the back room there was a little gallery, and in that room there was a laser maze. And so your goal was to clear the laser maze without triggering one of the lasers and get a piece of art and bring it back to the front. And so that was a pretty simple structure, and you can wrap your head around what the goal is. And people were coming, as in Soma, and so people were coming on their lunch breaks to do it. I mean, people were coming after work. It was crowded all the time. It was just a wonderful way. I'm still working on this, but this is just to show you all the different people that kind of get involved in Come Out and Play. And like I mentioned, the laser maze. And so there was someone who created that game. On the bottom of the triangle, you have the game makers. And then the people that were coming on their lunch breaks or whatever to play it, and that's the players. And then there's also this other side of a triangle that doesn't exist as much in video games, which are game runners. So these end up being like really good hosts. They have to understand the game really well because they have to be able to improvise, because sometimes something breaks or something is unfair, and they need to be able to understand game design and rules enough to be able to make good calls that make it feel fair and fun and engaging. But they're not responsible for authoring the game. And they have to have a good charismatic personality because they're interacting with the public. Meanwhile, some game makers can design really wonderful systems, but they're not necessarily the best game runners. They're kind of maybe don't want to be as outgoing. Not all of them. A lot of times they're the same, but I've seen that split more. And in a lot of companies that do real world games, largely for corporate team building events, they will be one and the same. Volunteers. So for Come Out and Play, we also have volunteers, and the game runners are often volunteers. When I do volunteer sign up, I say, I ask the people what they're looking for, if they would rather just be a door greeter or if they want to run a game. And so we align it with the interests. But they're not as responsible for making sure an individual game happens. They're responsible for making sure the whole event has the same attitude of fun and playfulness. So we'll do things like, we've had a theme every year. And so like one year it was like unicorns. So they're like wearing unicorn horns and offering it out to all the players. So they're doing these little things just to get you into that playful headspace from the very first moment you walk into a Come Out and Play event. And then they also make sure things run on time and do all of the sort of normal event planning things. And then the organizers, there's a team of us that's changed a lot over the years that kind of make sure all of this happens. And there's a lot of fluidity between these different roles. There's definitely been an ascension from player to game maker or volunteer, even to organizer. So Strawberry Hill, for instance, that game I mentioned to you, that game was designed by the same people who designed a very huge street game called Journey to the End of the Night. Has anyone here played that? I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that later. It's awesome, but it's like multi-thousands people, like anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 people racing across the city, trying not. It's like playing big zombie tag and different art installations along the way. So they've run it every year in San Francisco since 2005, and they ran it in New York as part of the 2006 Come Out and Play Festival. That design team is the same design team that made Strawberry Hill in San Francisco in 2010. And then 2 of those designers were part of the organization team for the festival in the next 2 years. So just as an example of how it ends up being a really strong community. People have met like boyfriends and girlfriends. They've met creative collaborators. They've gotten jobs from being involved in Come Out and Play, and they've made friendships for life. So that's really having these experiences together is one of the best things we've done. So 2016. So this year is actually was our biggest year yet. We're at the close of the season right now. But in December of last year, I got a phone call from Justin Hoover, who had been the artistic director at Soma Arts, which is the gallery where we ran it in 2012. He called me up, and he was now at Fort Mason. Now, Fort Mason, I had just been describing to our artistic director as my dream location for Come Out and Play, because it's near the marina, so it's near an urban area, but it has this grassy space. It's beautiful. It has these little structures. One of the things we've dealt with at Come Out and Play is that we have a number of different types of games. Originally, we were mostly just interested in street games, but now we've seen the design trends change over the years. So there's people designing alternative sports. There's people designing immersive theater. There's people continuing to design more urban exploration type thits. And so having a safe grassy area for like those alternative sports or field games is important. But it's just a beautiful location. It's a location that people don't go to very much, but when they get there, they're happy. And so that was another reason. I've had a creative interest in bringing people to new areas of the city. And so it was great. It was really fortuitous when he called me and he said, "Do you want to Come Out and Play here next year?" And I said, "Absolutely." I mean, you've got views of the Golden Gate Bridge. There's the off the grid every Friday. It's awesome. And then we had also this chapel, which it's like a military chapel. And we basically were able to have that be our headquarters for 3 full months to do whatever we wanted to with it. I mean, it's literally like a kid in a candy store for us and for our community of designers, because now we have this really cool location in the city, and we have like a home where we can just do things. And so, but it was a little bit, it stretched us in terms of, we wanted to stretch it. We wanted to stretch our thinking in terms of what is a Come Out and Play game, because this is a really indoor space. And so we wanted to connect the communities of theater people. There's a lot of like immersive theater happening. I don't know to what degree you're familiar with it, but these are kind of like theater events, but you're more involved, whether you're following the actors around in a room or actually taking on a role yourself. And they've been making basically theater more game-like. And meanwhile, we've seen a lot of our street games get more theater-like, where you have a dodgeball, but instead of being just a metaphor for a war battle, it's actually stated you're on this side and you're on that side. So it suddenly becomes a much more obvious metaphor for a war battle. And so we've been really excited to bring these two communities together, and the chapel was a good opportunity to do that. So what we did to expand was we continued to have our free festival, and we ran it from September 25th through October 8th. And for the festival, we wanted to focus on the different types of games that we see happening. Rather than having the past, what we had done was a one weekend festival with a bunch of different things. And the problem with that was when you have field games, which are could be anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes, and they're really tightly designed, and you have a lot of them, it would be really hard to get someone to commit to something that's more of an urban exploration, like a scavenger hunt type of a game, where they're going to go out and be in the city for 1 to 2 hours. That was a really hard sell, because who wants to leave the party to go do something else? And so we wanted to have, that was like the original nugget, was we wanted the urban explorations to have their own day. And it worked out quite well. There was a lower turnout at each individual day, but every single game was really successful and ran multiple times, and people were getting exactly what they wanted. So we did alt sports and night games, ended up being the most sort of blend. We had a bunch of different things, and that was after dark, and we actually had the gallery in the lower campus of Fort Mason and the chapel in the upper campus. And what we did there was we put our more formal gaming games that had very discrete win conditions and rules of play in the lower campus, and then we put much more surrealist narrative type experiences, more poetic experiences in the chapel. And we created an experience to connect the two, actually, because there was a huge stairwell. It was a 5-minute walk, which sounds like not much, but psychologically, we talk about psychogeography a lot when we're thinking about the festival, the role of physical location, the impact of it on your experience. It was a burden, but so we ended up having a really delightful game called Signs, and it was just all of these surrealist signs everywhere that were cat people this way, dog people that way, and it was follow the signs for more signs, and there were big signs and little signs, and they had sign painters, so we had people wearing these coveralls, and they had invented backstories, and they would take you each for one leg of the walk. So it was also like a shuttle. We really wanted to make sure that people went between them. And some people didn't want to wait for the sign painters, but they had the signs and they were lit up so they would know where to go. And then at the end, you could make your own sign. So we ended up basically covering the whole of Fort Mason, which was really ambitious, but it came off really well. And so that was definitely the most party night, and then the rest were for people who really love this type of play. And the journey to the end of the night has struggled, because they're so big, they're 2,000 or 3,000 people. They've struggled with getting park permits from San Francisco. That's been one of our challenges. It's become increasingly expensive. And so they were really thrilled to find Fort Mason as a home, and they're able to provide them with a safe place for their players to congregate at the beginning, because you have 2,000 people, all 2 or 3, depending on the year, all let loose at the same time to go run into the streets, and they can go to different checkpoints, but it can be a little dangerous. So the other thing we did was we did ticketed events, and this was new for us, where we actually charged money for a ticket. And the games that I call them games. We're kind of migrating towards calling them, you've probably heard me toggle between games and experiences. Where different people will identify as artist, game designer, or director, depending on from what community we're borrowing. So Jericho is an urban game. It's a big game of, it's like a Nerf battle on the streets, and you're playing a spy, and you're trying to get to secret drop-off locations without getting hit by other people with their Nerf guns. Superhero Academy was a kind of a corporate team building game. It was more like a team building game where you're doing a bunch of mini games and learning how to be a superhero. Ancient Regime was what I was most excited about bringing. It was by a group called Epic Immersive, and it was 3 days, each day sold out, and it was this huge immersive theater piece with some interactivity, but you got there and then you got picked up in a limousine and driven to a dock, and you had to stop this oppressive regime and help unlock freedom for this community of people. It was like an alternate world. It was sort of like an alternate dimension. It was San Parisco, so he was borrowing from French history, but positioning it as sort of a questioning of income inequality in San Francisco. And he works with a lot of different artist groups of set designers and actors in order to pull off they're really on a large scale. Animal Kingdom was, again, it was sort of these mini games, but it was also like a performance. It was very cool. Secret of the Cursed Chapel was a very theatrical room escape game. So you had to avoid getting the curse, and there was this hidden challenge at the end where you realized that in trying to avoid the curse, you had actually been cursed. So by solving all of the puzzles, you were bringing the curse upon yourself. The Racket is your last chance to play if you're interested in coming out to the city. It is a neo-noir adventure starring you, and it's very fun. In terms of system design, it's really cool. Every different person has a different role and different abilities, and your goal is to get the most money. And so you end up having to do things over the course of the evening. It's like a cocktail party, but you have to do things like kill people. And so you have this whole way of killing people, and then you can steal money and avoid killing, and so you end up having to do a lot of negotiation all night long. And the aesthetic is really nice too. And then the Dance in the Dawn is a LARP, live action role-playing game. It only accommodates 20 people, but each person is given a very specific role. It's kind of like a murder mystery party. If you've never done a LARP or don't know what they are, they're kind of like a murder mystery party, except your character sheet, instead of being like a paragraph of like funny language, is like 14 pages of like really well-written backstory, and you kind of try to absorb the character. And then you also learn the rules of the world. And then you spend this one is I think 6 hours long with other people acting out their roles to see how the story will conclude. So that sort of summarizes what we've done this year. Some of the challenges, we faced a lot of challenges this year. Going to Fort Mason was a huge opportunity. I mean, the benefits we got from Fort Mason, just in terms of sheer donation from them of space and staff, was just like amazing. And it was a symbiotic relationship because for them, they were interested in bringing new people out there. They do have a lot of like plays and like they have like the Commonwealth, they have these like high-end like intellectual events, but they were looking for something that was a little more playful and just connect with a younger audience. And so in that respect, that's what they were looking for from the partnership. But it's a little bit of a hard place to get to in San Francisco. It's not super accessible via public transit. And this is when I contrast this with when we were at Soma Arts, and Soma was much more easy to reach. And then there was one year we were in Civic Center, which was like literally like 100 feet from a BART station. So that affects our like level of work just to put off a successful event, because if it's hard to get to, we're not getting all of the people that we want. So if it's hard to get to via public transit, people have to be able to figure out how to carpool or be willing and have the resources to pay for a lift or own a car. And that ends up making it difficult for a huge section of the people that we want to attract. The other challenge that we faced was that we didn't have the implicit network effect. So because we had compressed all of the festival events into like a weekend, we were able to get that, what I talked about at the very beginning, where it was like, oh, the people who like my game like your game, and so they're just setting aside the weekend. We wanted to solve the problem of, I'm going to be out of town that weekend, so you could still have things to play. But ultimately, the events, the one-off events that were the most successful were ones that were large collaborations, such as Ancient Regime, which had a number of artist groups. So then all of those people were inviting their friends and networks to come to the event. So that made festival promotion a little bit of a challenge. And so that's Come Out and Play. I want to talk to you about, just very quickly, because I think we're hitting on our time soon, but I want to talk to you about two other like games that I've been working on lately. The first is the Headlands Gamble. And this is really, really cool. So First Person Travel is an immersive narrative travel agency. And this is our first trip that you can book. And it is a whole weekend of an all-inclusive vacation. So you don't have to plan a thing. It's pretty expensive, but you don't have to plan a thing. And then it's for 2 people. So it's for friends, siblings. Most people who book it are romantic partners. And so they sign up for it, and then they book their weekend, we pick them up, a driver picks them up, they get a mysterious phone call, a driver picks them up and brings them to their rendezvous point. And at that point, they have an encounter with an actress. And she lets them know, she's sort of the protagonist of the whole story. She lets them know about the mystery that they're solving this weekend, which is that they need to help find this missing racehorse. And she enlists their help as like her assistant Gumshoes to help her solve the mystery. What happened to the horse? Where'd he go? How do we get him back? Who did this? And then she sends them off. And from there, everything that they do is based on the story. So they're given a convertible car, and that is given to them. She's like sort of gotten it from another character in the story, and so she's loaning it to them so that they can help her. Same thing with their meals. Herb, who is another character in the story, meets up with them and says, "Since you're helping out, help me." He's the owner of the horse. He's like, "Since you're helping me, I'm going to buy you lunch." And so every meal, it's an all-inclusive vacation, but all of the stuff that you get, it's not just like the travel agency has already paid for it. It's in the story of why you're getting it. Same thing with the hotel room. And along the way, you're meeting actors, you're uncovering clues, there's an audio walking tour, you're exploring. You go from wherever you're picked up in the Bay Area to Berkeley, and then all through Marin. So you see all these different spots in Marin. And you have an iPad that's kind of like your game HUD, your heads-up display. And it shows you the progress, and it unlocks new characters as you meet them and summarizes the information you've learned, and you can keep notes there. And so then you spend the night, and so you're literally immersed in this world and this mystery for 2 full days, trying to solve the mystery of the missing racehorse. So it's a pretty big project in terms of undertaking. It's for 2 people, and this is a trend that I've seen and come out in play too, where we used to have these like really big games, and now we increasingly have more complex, deep games for very intimate audiences of like 1 or 2 players. I've seen that happen and come out in play, and this is, I think, is part of a similar trend. There's so much opportunity to interact with huge numbers of people online that there's a certain appetite and craving for this intimacy. So even though, even for the actor, this is a very different experience. Just if you think of his perspective too, he's used to performing to a whole crowd, but here he's performing for 2 people, and so he's not getting the applause. But it ends up being a much more emotional experience for everyone involved. In working with actors, and like we actually worked with a Hollywood writer and director on it, something interesting happened for me as a game designer, which was the director was like, I don't think people need choice. And so there was it totally opened my mind of what I meant by choice, because in game design we talk a lot about meaningful choice, and you want every decision point to have a discernible impact on the system, so that you can see like, okay, I ate the pellet, and so now I'm invincible, like if you're playing Pac-Man. Like that choice, I turned down here to get it. So all of these choices, but they're so discrete and so systemic. But then, and so I was floored to hear him, and it makes sense. When you're like watching a movie, I don't have any meaningful choice. I'm just sitting there watching it, and I'm receiving this beautiful story. And so it was really hard for me to hear the idea that maybe people don't want choice. We went with it. There's a few decision points where you can impact the story of this. There are a few. They're very simple, like rudimentary choose your own adventure. We couldn't do it with actors. I mean, they're not actual digital avatars. It's not as simple as just recording a new voiceover to play instead of, A, B, C, or D based on what you did for input. So when I did a play test of this with my husband, though, I realized that there was infinite choice, way more choice than in anything I've ever designed. because you're having these interactions, and it's small moment-to-moment choice. It's the same kind of choices we have to make every day. Am I going to hold the door for you? Am I going to treat you with warmth? Am I going to have a little distance? These very human choices you're doing all of the time, and you have a goal, and it's a safe place to practice those different approaches. So it's sort of similar to if you were in an improv troupe, but it's even different than that because you're not performing for an audience and you're not all trained the same way. The actor is really skilled. But there is a tremendous amount of choice, and it will absolutely impact your experience and the performance you get. So this was mind-blowing for me because it just changed my perspective of choice from what I had learned as a game designer. I already did that one. And then the last one I want to talk about is, so I've seen this change from, at first it was like, when we started coming out and playing in 2006, it was like all these games were like geolocation games, like track me where I am, my location, it's so fun, and like take a picture, and like selfie games. And now people are like, oh, I'm here to play in the real world, where do I put my phone? I don't want to have they don't want the phone on them anymore. They're ready for like a little digital detox. And the intimacy, this year I've done games for 3 different friends' weddings in the last year. And so this couple didn't want any dancing. They're not religious. If any of you are from a Jewish background or have been to a Jewish wedding, you might recognize what they're doing. But they didn't know anything about this tradition. So they didn't want dancing. They had a really bizarre ceremony that they worked on with a theater director, actually. But they wanted an activity that would connect their guests with each other, that would give them something to do and give them opportunities to connect. But they wanted them to be connecting in a more meaningful way than dancing, which was why they like to dance. It's not like they don't like to dance. They just wanted it to be a little deeper. So they had me and a few other friends create art projects, and mine was a game. And the rules were pretty simple. It was I had a station where people had symbols that had a number etched on them, wood symbols, stickers, and they could wear them. Most of them wore them like on their face or on their shirt. And they needed to find as many people wearing that same symbol, and then come back to me, and then I would give them a quest. So if they had a 3 of diamonds, they had to find 3 other people with a diamond, and then they could come back to me and get a quest. And the quests were things like deceive the evil eye by changing up your look and others. And so I gave them temporary tattoos, and they were putting temporary tattoos on each other. Ask the bartender to make 2 identical, non-alcoholic, non-fruity, non-sugar drinks for Albert and Andrea as an unusual ingredient. Find out what it is. Have the couple feed each other sips of the drinks and try to guess the secret ingredient. So they didn't have any of the traditional stuff like feeding each other of the cake, but they weren't opposed to it. And so I wanted to borrow as much as I could from existing wedding traditions, because a lot of those traditions come from a goal of connecting people together. So I wanted to borrow from those traditions, but give it a more modern twist to make it be more palatable for people who really just want to have fun. But not just fun and party, they want to have a connection. But the way we connect today just is a little bit different. Everyone wants it to feel really special and unique. Love letters, write a note of joy to the couple to open for their 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 5 year, etc. anniversary. Put the note in the mailbox. One person takes Albert's shoes. This was actually based on a tradition I found from a I can't remember the culture, but I actually found this tradition. Hides the shoes and returns here. The shoes must be hidden in plain sight and no higher than 6 feet off the ground. The group breaks up to hunt down Albert's shoes. Whoever finds a shoe wins. And it ended up being this really fortuitous moment because the groom happened to have on really silly socks, so nobody would have been able to see that he was wearing those if we hadn't done this one. And then last, Albert and Andrea each take a seat in a chair. The group works together to lift each other, to lift each of them into the air and slowly parades them across the room. So this was their version of this tradition, but they're not meaning the couple, it was sort of the community, how they interpreted that. And those were just a few of the quests that I had suggested. And then they would come back after they completed the quest and just sign it and put it on a board. It ended up being a little keepsake for the couple. They had this memory of all the different quests they had done and who had helped carry them off. The couple also didn't do a receiving line or anything like that, So this was another way to make sure that everybody had an interaction with the couple. Another great thing about the way the structure worked was that by wearing the marker, you are saying, I'm part of this wedding quest experience. 90% of the guests played it. And so for an introvert, someone who was more introverted, it meant you can come up and talk to me. I'm wearing this. I want you to come up and talk to me. And for a more extroverted person, it allowed them to say, oh good, you're going to be willing for me to talk to you. And so it ended up being this great way of allowing them to kind of come together at a pace that felt approachable and comfortable for them. People had a great time. The little kids basically ended up being a lot of the leaders in it too, which is always fun to see. They were really, really into it. And so that's the last thing I'm going to talk about. So you can come out and play with us. There's just the racket is left that has tickets still available. But you can join our mailing list. We always post about things going on like this, real world in real life, gaming experiences, immersive theater. We post through our Facebook and Twitter and our mailing list. And yeah, most of the things that we run are free. A lot of them are ticketed, but all of it goes to helping support the artists through stipends. And that's it. So now I'll take any questions.